For years, Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan enjoyed the quiet respect of her regional friends. She had inherited a divided country after John Magufuli's death and sold herself as a reformer.
Naapa kwamba nitatenda kazi zangu za urais wa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania kwa uaminifu na kutimiza wajibu wa kazi hizo kwa bidii.
But by early November 2025, that veil had cracked. Samia, hatukutaki. Hatukutaki Samia. What began as an awkward silence after her disputed re-election had turned into an extraordinary spectacle. Presidents publicly questioning one of their own. The election of October 29th was presented by Tanzania's National Electoral Commission as a democratic triumph. Suluhu, it announced, had won with 97.6% of the vote, later quietly adjusted to 98% in some regions.
Naomba sasa nikukabidhi hati ya kuchaguliwa kuwa rais wa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania.
The number was so implausible that even allies struggled to keep straight faces. For 12 days after the announcement, most African leaders stayed silent, following the unwritten rule of regional diplomacy, that you don't call out a neighbor. Then, one by one, that silence broke.
Unaona jirani amefanya election 98%. 98%. Hata kuna jamaa mmoja kutoka Sudan alikuwa anauliza Ibrahim ambao ni mfanyabiashara anajulikana sana. Anasema kama unaweza kupata 98%, sasa unakataza wengine kusimama kwa nini? If you can get 98%.
Now here is a list of world leaders who have condemned Suluhu's regime. Number 1, President Ruto. The first to speak was William Ruto of Kenya. In a live Al Jazeera interview, he was asked about election credibility in East Africa, especially in Tanzania. And this is what he had to say.
Is there still democracy in Tanzania?
It's not for me to judge Tanzania. It is...
seems a bit fishy. 97%, doesn't it?
Well, in a democracy, for example, in Kenya, you can never get 96%.
So it's not a democracy anymore then?
That is you saying. Every country have a way of them doing their stuff. So I think we should stick to democracy, and we must always give ourselves the opportunity to listen to the alternative view, to look at the alternative without injecting violence into the equation.
Now, the comment wasn't on the script, and that was the point. Kenya's 2022 vote had been bitterly contested, but at least it was believable. Within hours, Ruto's remark was trending across East Africa. Tanzanian broadcasters blacked it out, but the clip still spread online. Ruto had broken an unspoken regional code. For years, presidents congratulated each other no matter how messy the polls. His bluntness risked trade with more than $1 billion a year, yet it also gave others cover to speak. Number 2, Khama. The next morning, November 10th, Khama walked onto a stage at Lukenya University in Kenya. Khama didn't bother with caution. He named names: the assassination of opposition leader Tundu Lissu's aide, the detention of over 1,200 Chadema members, the disqualification of 14 out of 15 opposition candidates. Then he called for sanctions, SADC level, AU level, and global.
I, for one, do not recognize the person who was inaugurated as the President of Tanzania. She is an illegitimate president. The Africa we dream of, peaceful, prosperous and respected, will only emerge when our governance is guided by our values and not by our interests. Turning to recent examples, it is totally unacceptable. It is totally unacceptable when an Africa leader, in order to stay in power, will resort to killing his or her own people. In order to stay in power, will rig an election as if they are God's gift to their country. When you have a country with millions of people, for any leader to think they are the only ones who can be president is pathetic. And therefore, and my apology to those who may come from Tanzania, but I'm mentioning this because they are your neighbor, that the recent election and what transpired, the killings around that election, I for one do not recognize the person who was inaugurated as the president of Tanzania. She is an illegitimate president.
Khama's attack was unprecedented. No former president had gone that far against a sitting African leader in recent memory. And his military background as a former commander of the Botswana Defense Forces lent a sharp edge to his words. Number 3. Mogwetsi Masisi. The former Botswana president himself had already made his position known through official channels. As head of the African Union's election observation mission, he had signed a report declaring Tanzania's election non-compliant with AU standards. The findings cited systematic exclusion of opposition candidates, monopoly over the state media, and credible reports of violence and intimidation.
It was the rule. So most of the donors and development partners pulled out because it wasn't making sense. We know the epicenter was Tanzania, not Zanzibar. Nobody had a problem with Zanzibar. But now she shifted goalposts at the last minute, saying people to go to Zanzibar. So for some of us who are lucky, we got our accreditation at the last minute, like 2 days to the day. And so we went in. I went in on a Monday. And when I went in, normally what happens is that you look for comrades because we knew how the situation was, as my senior said. It was already very tensed with the killings, with the abductions, and all that was going on. So the natural thing to do was to go in there and look for comrades, especially from Kenyans, because we know the dicey relationship between Kenya and Tanzania at the moment. And so when I went, I met my seniors coming back into Kenya. So that one really left me exposed. But because I wanted to see for myself what was happening, because at the end of the day, you must do a report to the world, to the region, to say this is what we witnessed, this is what happened. I decided to stay back. But I later realized that it was a blunder that I shouldn't have made. I should have just come back home. Because even getting the usual briefs that happen before an election was not there. You go to INEC and people are just busy doing their things. Nobody was giving us the briefs. Nobody was talking to us. And clearly there was a very heavy military presence, which is very frightening. It's not a normal thing to see military all over. So when you go to a place you are new and you find military, that in itself is very frightening. And so most of the people came back to Kenya, and a few of us decided to remain. And that was the start of our problems.
It was the first time in 2 decades that the AU had refused to recognize an election result from a member state. And the report flagged violations of the AU Charter's democratic principles, paving the way for suspension discussions. You see, before the AU report reached Addis Ababa, another verdict had already come from the south. The Southern African Development Community's Electoral Observation Mission concluded that the Tanzanian process failed to meet basic standard of transparency, inclusivity, and freedom of expression. While the criticism gathered momentum, others chose silence. Rwanda's Paul Kagame sent a deputy to Suluhu's inauguration. Uganda's Yoweri Museveni congratulated her personally, but didn't show up at her inauguration. Zimbabwe's Emerson Mnangagwa attended the ceremony. Mozambique's Filipe Nyusi offered no comment. It was the first coordinated wave of presidential-level skepticism in East Africa since the fall of Robert Mugabe. For the first time in modern Tanzania history, a sitting president faced regional isolation not from sanctions or war, but from disbelief. The old habit of quiet solidarity had collapsed. The unspoken agreement between heads of state never to question one another's mandate was no longer holding. The silence that once surrounded elections like these had broken wide open.